My name is Judith Marlowe, and at 68, I was standing in the courtyard of Ridgemont High School in a gray cardigan, holding a tray of folding chairs, when my daughter-in-law introduced me to my own former teachers as the cleaner. She said it warmly. Almost proudly. Like she was doing me a favor by explaining me at all. "Oh, don't mind her, she just helps out around here," Brianna said, patting my shoulder the way you'd pat a stranger's dog. 3 teachers standing in that circle had worked for me for over a decade. 2 of them had cried in my office. One of them I'd hired myself, 22 years old and terrified, on a Tuesday in August. None of them corrected her. Here's the part that still gets me, more than the insult itself. It wasn't the worst thing that happened that morning. The worst thing was that in 90 minutes, the superintendent was going to walk onto that stage and say my name into a microphone in front of 600 people, and Brianna didn't know it yet. Drop a comment, tell me what school district you're watching from, and subscribe, because you'll want to be here for the ending. Let me tell you who I actually am, so the rest of this lands the way it should. I was a teacher for 9 years before I became a principal, and I was a principal at Ridgemont High School for 20 years after that. 1998 to 2018. I hired half the current staff. I built the reading intervention program that this district still uses as a model. I stood in that gymnasium and shook 6,000 hands over 2 decades, one graduating senior at a time. My husband Gordon used to say I ran that building like it was a ship and I was the only one who'd read the manual. Gordon died 9 years ago. Heart, no warning, on a Sunday while he was refilling the bird feeder. I kept working 2 more years after that because the building was the only place grief let me breathe. When I retired in 2018, the school board gave me a plaque and a sheet cake and told me I could keep an office key for sentimental reasons. I never gave the key back. I never told anyone that either. These days I don't look like someone who used to run anything. I know that. I wear cardigans with pilled elbows and gardening clogs because 6 years ago I started the founder's garden behind the science wing, and dirt doesn't care what you used to be paid. People see an old woman in clogs holding a folding chair and they build a whole story around her without asking a single question. I used to think that was harmless. I was wrong, and I'd find out exactly how wrong before that Friday was over. I should tell you, too, that I was not always the woman people assume ran things easily. I started teaching in 1978, 22 years old, in a classroom with a broken radiator and a principal who called me young lady for a decade past the point it was accurate. I was passed over for department head twice, both times for men with less experience and more confidence in a necktie. I learned early that the room usually decides who matters before anyone opens their mouth, and that the only cure for that is time, and paperwork, and simply outlasting the assumption. By the time I made principal in 1998, I'd buried that lesson so deep I thought I'd never need it again. 20 years running a $14 million budget with a perfect audit record will do that to a person. You start to believe the respect is permanent. It isn't. It's rented, and the bill comes due the moment you stop looking the part. My son Derek married Brianna 3 years ago. She's 34, sharp, ambitious, works in regional sales for a medical device company, and she is very, very good at reading a room for who matters in it. She has never once asked me what I did for a living before I retired. Not once, in 3 years, over 4 Thanksgivings and a wedding. I used to find that funny. A little sad, but funny. Derek never corrected her either, and I understood why. Derek has spent his whole life avoiding friction the way other men avoid speeding tickets. My grandson Mason is Derek's son from his first marriage, 17 years old, graduating top of his class, the reason I was standing in that courtyard at all. Mason is the one person in that family who has always asked me questions. Real ones. He used to sit in my old office as a little boy, swinging his legs off a chair too big for him, asking why the ceiling tiles were a different color in the corner. I told him once. Water damage, 2004, budget fight with the county. He remembered it for 10 years. That morning, I'd come early, the way I always do, because 18 years of habit doesn't retire just because you do. I was helping Nadia Ruiz, the current principal, set up the folding chairs for the reception because Nadia's staff was short 2 people and I was standing right there in comfortable shoes. Nadia was the assistant principal I trained myself, back in 2011. She calls me boss as a joke that isn't really a joke. I was carrying a stack of chairs across the courtyard when Brianna's book club friends arrived early. 3 women in bright silk, the kind of women who photograph brunch before they eat it. One of the teachers, Mrs. Okafor, who I'd hired in 2009, spotted me and lit up. "Judith. I didn't know you were coming. It's so good to see you." She hugged me, chairs and all. Brianna, standing 3 feet away in heels that had no business on gravel, turned to her friends with a bright, tidy little laugh. "Oh, don't mind her, she just helps out around here," she said. "She's like our unofficial cleaner." Very sweet. The silk dress friend smiled the way you smile at information that doesn't concern you. Mrs. Okafor's face did something complicated. A flinch quickly smoothed over into professional neutrality, the exact expression teachers learn for parent conferences that are about to go badly. I set the chairs down. I didn't correct her. "I want you to understand that wasn't weakness. 20 years running a building full of teenagers teaches you when a fight is worth having in front of an audience, and when it isn't. This wasn't the room. Not yet." So I said, "Nice to see you again, Brianna," picked the chairs back up, and walked toward the gym. Behind me, I heard one of the silk dress women murmur, "She seems sweet," and Brianna answer, "She's a doll. A little simple, but a doll. A little simple." I'd run a budget of $14 million a year for 2 decades without a single audit finding. I kept walking. My hands didn't shake. I noticed that. If you've ever been the person a room decided to explain instead of ask, you already know this feeling in your chest. Stay with me, because the microphone hadn't been turned on yet. I found out later, piece by piece, the way you find out most things that matter, that this wasn't the first time. Harriet Voss has been my closest friend since 1985. Our husbands played golf together badly for 30 years. Harriet was there that morning, holding a program, and she caught up with me by the drink table while Brianna was occupied charming a school board member she'd mistaken for someone important. "Judith," Harriet said quietly, "does Brianna actually not know who you are?" "She's never asked." Harriet's mouth went thin. "She told my niece at a work dinner last spring that Derek's mother, and I quote, does light housekeeping, keeps busy, you know how that generation is. My niece thought you cleaned houses for money. She felt sorry for you." I stood very still by the lemonade. When was this? March. The company holiday party, actually, back in December before that too. Derek's boss was there. She introduced you the same way to him. Derek's boss. The man who decides whether my son gets promoted had been told, twice, that his employee's mother scrubs floors for a living. Are you sure it wasn't a joke that landed wrong? I asked, because I wanted, badly, for there to be an innocent version of this. Judith, Harriet said, my niece offered to pass along a cleaning contact for her office building. She felt bad for you. She thought you needed the work. I stood there holding a plastic cup of lemonade like it was the only steady thing left in the courtyard. How long has she been saying this? At least since last December. Maybe longer. You know I don't repeat things unless I'm sure, Judith. I called my niece again this morning before I drove over, just to check I wasn't misremembering. I wasn't. I thought about every holiday dinner for the last 3 years. Every time I'd mentioned the reading program, or a former student who'd come back to thank me, and Brianna had smiled the polite smile of someone waiting for her turn to talk about something else. I hadn't been invisible to her by accident. I'd been edited, carefully, into a version of myself she could explain in one sentence at a dinner party. I didn't know yet why Brianna needed that story to be true. I only knew that it was, apparently, a story she'd been telling for over a year, polished enough by now that it came out of her mouth like a fact instead of a lie. Nadia found me a few minutes later, clipboard in hand, and pulled me gently behind the equipment shed where the gym storage keeps its bad acoustics. "You know what's happening at 2:15, she said. It wasn't a question. The scholarship announcement. Not just the scholarship. Nadia's eyes were bright in a way I didn't like. The board voted last month. They're renaming the library. The Judith Marlowe Library. Dr. Feld is announcing it today, during the ceremony, in front of everyone." I set my lemonade down very carefully. Nobody told me that. We wanted it to be a surprise. For the graduates too. Half the seniors this year, this whole graduating class, learned to read using the program you built. 20 years, and I still didn't see that one coming. "Does Brianna know?" I asked, and I heard how strange the question sounded even as it left my mouth. Why would my daughter-in-law's opinion matter to a library dedication? But it mattered, because Brianna was about to sit in the third row, surrounded by her book club friends and Derek's co-workers, and watch her mother-in-law's name get engraved into granite while she'd spent the morning calling that same woman a doll, a little simple. "No idea," Nadia said. "But Judith, everyone in that building today knows exactly who you are. Every single teacher, every custodian, half the parents. The only person in that courtyard who doesn't know is the one who married into your family." I stood behind that shed a long moment, working something out in my head the way I used to work out a difficult budget line. I could go find Brianna right now and correct the record quietly, privately, spare everyone the scene. Or I could let the day do what the day was already going to do, and simply be present for it. I chose the second thing, and I want to be honest about why. Not because I wanted to humiliate her. I want you to hear that clearly. I chose it because I had spent 3 years being polite about being erased, and for once, I was tired of doing the correcting myself. On my way back to my seat, Rosa Delgado stopped me by the gym doors. Rosa runs the cafeteria now, but I hired her in 2003 when she was 19 and needed a job badly enough to work double shifts through her own senior year of night school. "Mrs. Marlowe," she said, "your daughter-in-law asked me 20 minutes ago if the reception food was being handled by the same woman who does the cleaning." I told her I didn't know what she meant. "What did you tell her, Rosa?" "I told her the food was being handled by the parent committee, ma'am." "I didn't say your name." I figured that wasn't my line to say. I thanked her, and I meant it, because Rosa could have corrected Brianna on the spot and chose instead to let the day unfold the way it was already unfolding, one honest omission at a time. It told me something important. This wasn't one careless comment in a courtyard. Brianna had been asking around all morning, quietly building a story to explain me to people, and every single person she'd asked had known the truth and let her keep digging her own hole. If you've ever swallowed an insult because the room wasn't ready to hear the truth yet, tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you think dignity is worth more than a scene, subscribe now, because in about 40 minutes, Dignity was about to get a microphone. Before the ceremony started, I want to tell you something about Brianna, because it matters, and because fairness costs me nothing now. Brianna grew up outside Youngstown, the daughter of a machinist and a woman who cleaned offices at night to make the second half of the mortgage. Brianna has told me this exactly twice, both times quickly, both times followed by a change of subject. She has spent her whole adult life climbing away from a house where the word cleaner described her own mother, and where teachers, she once let slip, had treated her like a charity case because her clothes came from the discount rack. I think, somewhere underneath the silk dresses and the careful book club friendships, Brianna is still the girl who got looked at sideways in a school hallway, and she built a whole adult personality out of making sure that never happened to her again. An old woman in a cardigan and gardening clogs, standing near the people Brianna most wanted to impress, must have looked, to her, exactly like the thing she'd spent 20 years running from. So she did what frightened people do. She rewrote me into someone she could explain away before anyone asked a real question. That doesn't make it right. I want to be clear about that too. But it made it human, and understanding it kept my hands steady in a way anger never could have. At 2 o'clock, the graduates filed in, 400 blue gowns, and I found my seat where Nadia had reserved one for me, second row, aisle side, a seat I hadn't asked for and Brianna hadn't noticed being assigned. Brianna sat one section over with her book club friends and a man I recognized from a photo Derek had shown me once, his regional manager, in town for the occasion because Derek had mentioned his son's graduation in a meeting and the man had said, generously, that he'd love to come. Derek sat beside her, checking his tie and his phone camera, tired in the way men get when they've spent years smoothing things over instead of naming them. The principal, Nadia, opened with the standard remarks. Then the valedictorian speech, then 2 student songs, and then Mason walked to the podium in his blue gown, tassel already flipped early because he never could follow instructions about tassels. He found me in the crowd before he found his notes. I want to thank someone most of you don't know is in this room, Mason said, and my stomach did something strange and warm. When I was 7, I used to sit in the principal's office at this school and ask 100 questions a day. That principal never once told me to be quiet. She told me the ceiling tiles were a different color because of a budget fight in 2004. She's my grandmother, Judith Marlowe, and she ran this school for 20 years before most of you were even born. 600 people turned to look at row 2. I felt Mrs. Okafor's hand find my shoulder from behind. I heard Nadia, at the podium, start to clap before anyone else did, the way you clap when you've been holding something in for weeks. I found Brianna's face in the crowd. I want to describe it honestly. It wasn't anger, not at first. It was the particular blankness of a person doing frantic math in real time. Derek's boss turned to Brianna and said, loud enough for the row behind him to hear, "Wait, your mother-in-law ran this school?" Brianna's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Dr. Feld, the superintendent, took the podium next, and I watched Brianna's whole body go rigid as he said my full name into 600 people's ears. Before we close today's ceremony, the Ridgemont Unified School Board has one final piece of business. Effective this fall, the school library will be renamed in honor of the woman who spent 20 years building the reading program every graduate in this gymnasium once used to learn their letters. Please join me in recognizing Principal Judith Marlowe, and welcoming her back to this stage. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was loud, and it went on, and half the teachers in the room stood up, which is not a thing teachers do lightly at the end of a long ceremony. I walked to that stage in gardening clogs because I hadn't thought to bring different shoes, and I want you to know that detail mattered to me more than anything else that day. I stood at that podium exactly as I was, cardigan and all, and the pin the school board gave me at retirement, the small enamel one that says 20 years of service, was still on my collar where I'd worn it out of habit that morning without thinking twice. I didn't give a long speech. I've given enough long speeches in that gym to last a lifetime. Thank you, I said. I spent 20 years telling students that the work matters more than the title on the door. I still believe that. I'm glad the reading is what stayed. I found Mason's eyes in the crowd of blue gowns, and I found Brianna's, 3 rows back, white as her book club friend's teeth. A school doesn't forget who built it, I said, even when family does. I hadn't planned that line. It came out anyway, and it was true. The applause swallowed the rest. Dr. Feld shook my hand, and then, because superintendents like a good story as much as anyone, he added into the microphone, for those who don't know, Principal Marlowe also personally trained our current principal, Nadia Ruiz, back when Nadia was a 26-year-old assistant principal who, and I quote from the file, showed real promise but needed seasoning. Laughter rippled through the gym. Nadia, standing at the side of the stage, put both hands over her face and laughed along with it. She seasoned me plenty, Nadia called out, and the whole gymnasium laughed again, the good kind of laugh, the kind that makes a room feel like a family instead of an audience. I looked out at 400 blue gowns and found Mason's face near the front, grinning so wide I thought his cap might fall off. I found Brianna's face too, 3 rows back, and for just a moment before the mask of composure came back down, I watched her do the arithmetic of a year of dinner parties and holiday small talk, all of it rewritten in real time by a granite plaque she hadn't known was coming. I want to tell you what happened in the 90 seconds after I left that stage, because it happened fast, And it happened in front of everyone Brianna had spent 3 years trying to impress. Derek's boss turned to her and said, not unkindly, but not gently either, you told me your mother-in-law cleans houses. Brianna's book club friends went very quiet, the specific quiet of women recalculating a story they'd repeated to other people. Mrs. Okafor, walking past with a stack of programs, said to no one in particular but loud enough for the row to hear, guess the cleaner built the West Wing. I didn't say that. I want to be honest with you. I didn't need to. Brianna found me near the drink table 20 minutes later, her face doing something between mortified and furious, the two emotions competing for the same real estate. You could have told me, she said. I did tell you, Brianna. 3 years ago, at Thanksgiving, when you asked what I used to do and I said I was a school principal. You said, and I remember this exactly, that's nice, and asked Derek to pass the rolls. She didn't have an answer for that, because there wasn't one. You've been telling people I clean houses, I said. For over a year. Harriet's niece. Derek's boss, twice. I only just heard about it today. That's not, she started, and then stopped, because a lie only survives in a room where nobody's checked the facts, and I'd had all morning to check them. I'm not angry that you didn't know my history, I said, and I meant it. I'm troubled that you never once wondered enough to ask. And I'm troubled that when a room needed an explanation for a woman in a cardigan, the explanation you reached for was the smallest one available. Brianna's eyes filled, and for a moment I saw the girl from Youngstown underneath all that silk. My mom cleaned offices, she said quietly. People used to look at me like I was nothing because of it. Then you, of all people, I said, should have known better than to hand that look to somebody else. She didn't answer. There wasn't a version of that sentence that made her look good, and to her credit, she didn't try to invent one on the spot. Derek found us both a few minutes later, and I watched my son do something I hadn't seen him do in 3 years of marriage. He looked at his wife, not at the floor, and he said, you told my boss my mother cleans houses. Twice. Why would you do that? Brianna started to cry properly then, not performance tears, the real kind, the kind that come out sideways and ugly. I didn't want anyone thinking I married beneath myself, she said, and then heard it out loud, and looked sick. Derek didn't have a response for a long moment. Neither did I, she's not beneath anybody, he finally said. She ran this whole school. I know that now, Brianna said. Everyone in this gymnasium knows that now. It wasn't an apology yet. But it was the first true sentence she'd said to me in 3 years, and I've learned that true sentences, even ugly ones, are worth more than 100 polite ones. If you've ever had the truth do the work you'd spent years too tired to do yourself, leave one word in the comments. I read every single one. And if a quiet woman finally getting her name on a building sounds like justice to you, subscribe now, because there's more to this than one ceremony. The weeks after the graduation were quieter than I expected, and quieter than I think Brianna expected too. Her book club friends, I heard through Harriet, had a great deal to say about the woman who'd called her mother-in-law a doll, a little simple, in front of half the county. Not cruel things, mostly. Just the specific, deflating kind of gossip that follows a person who got caught being smaller than they wanted to appear. Derek's boss mentioned the library dedication in a meeting, apparently, as an interesting piece of local news, and asked Derek, in front of colleagues, why his wife had told him something so different a year earlier. Derek didn't have a good answer. He told me later that was the worst 10 seconds of his professional life, and I believed him. Derek came to see me alone on a Tuesday evening in June, sat at my kitchen table where he used to do his homework, and said the thing I'd been waiting 3 years to hear. I let her do that, he said. The cleaner thing. Not just this year. I've heard her say versions of it before, and I never corrected her, because it was easier than the fight. Why? I asked, though I already knew the shape of the answer. Because you've never needed defending, he said. You've always been fine. I told myself that. I told myself you didn't care what people thought, so it didn't matter. I cared, I said. I just decided a long time ago which fights were worth my breath. This wasn't one I thought I needed to have myself. I thought you might, eventually. He looked at his hands a long moment. I should have had it a year ago, he said. I'm sorry, Mom. That was worth more to me than the plaque on the library wall, and I've thought about that plaque every day since it went up. Brianna called me in July, not to make excuses, which surprised me, but to ask if she could take me to lunch. We sat at a small diner near the school, and she told me she'd started seeing someone, a therapist, once a week since the graduation. I spent so long being embarrassed of where I came from, she said, turning her coffee cup in slow circles, that I think I got good at deciding, real fast, who was worth explaining properly and who wasn't. I never once thought that made me exactly the kind of person who used to hurt my mom. No, I said. It didn't occur to you. That's the part one needed you to see. I see it now. I don't know yet if I fully believe her. 6 weeks of therapy doesn't erase 3 years of habit, and I've learned not to hand out trust just because someone finally said the right sentence out loud. But she asked, for the first time in 3 years, what my 20 years at Ridgemont had actually been like, and she listened to the whole answer without checking her phone once. That's not forgiveness. It's a start, and I've decided a start is worth showing up for. We had the family over for dinner in August, the first real gathering since the graduation. Brianna arrived early, which she'd never done before, and asked if she could help in the kitchen instead of sitting in the living room with a glass of wine, which she also had never done before. She burned the garlic bread. We both laughed about it, carefully, the way two people laugh when they're testing whether laughing together is allowed again. Over dinner, her mother's name came up, the mother who used to clean offices at night in Youngstown, and Brianna told the table, unprompted, that her mom had put 3 kids through community college on that income and never once complained about the hours. I used to be embarrassed by that, she said. I'm not anymore. I don't know why it took losing my dignity in a school gymnasium to figure that out, but it did. Derek reached over and took her hand. I noticed he did it without being asked, which was new too. I don't know if Brianna and I will ever be close the way some mothers and daughters-in-law are close. I'm not sure that kind of closeness gets built out of an apology, however sincere. But she asks now. Real questions, about the reading program, about Gordon, about what it was like running a building full of teenagers through 2 recessions and 1 flood. And when she introduces me now, at the one work function I've since attended with Derek, she says, "This is Judith Marlowe. She ran Ridgemont High for 20 years and the library's named after her." She says it plainly, like a fact, because by then, everyone in that room already knew, and pretending otherwise would only have embarrassed her twice. Mason chose to attend the state university 2 hours from here in the fall, close enough to visit, and he told me, the week before he left, that he wants to teach high school English someday. I figured out what I wanted to do, he said, sitting in your old office when I was 7, listening to you explain a ceiling tile like it mattered. It did matter. Everything you explained to me mattered. I keep that sentence somewhere I can find it on hard days. I still wear the cardigans. I still tend the founder's garden behind the science wing every Thursday morning, and I still get mistaken, now and then, for someone who does light housekeeping, because a woman my age in gardening clogs will always read as smaller than she is to somebody who hasn't bothered to ask. Last month, a new parent at the fall open house saw me kneeling in the mulch by the science wing and asked, kindly enough, whether the district paid its groundskeepers a living wage. I told her I didn't know, because I've never actually been on the payroll for this particular job. She looked confused until Nadia walked by and said, "That's Judith Marlowe. The library's named after her." The woman apologized 3 separate times. I told her not to bother. I'd rather be underestimated in clogs than overestimated in heels I can't garden in. I've stopped minding the assumption itself. What I stopped tolerating is the room deciding my worth without ever checking the record, because the record was always there, 20 years of it, filed and true and waiting. If you've spent your life being explained instead of asked, I want you to hear this the way I finally heard it myself, standing at a podium in gardening clogs with a service pin on my collar. where whatever lets you do the work. Let the fools underestimate the cardigan. Then let the library, the plaque, the 20 years, do the talking you got tired of doing yourself. If this story found you at the right moment, subscribe to Iron Mom Stories, and tell me in the comments what building, what title, what 20 years of your own life somebody almost erased in a single careless sentence. I read every one. And I promise you, so does the room, eventually.